With the first pick in our 2025 post-draft Superflex 1.5 tight end premium Dynasty rookie mock draft, I'm taking Ashton Jeanty. Do I really need to say anything more than that? I mean, he gets the premier landing spot with the Vegas Raiders, 6th overall draft capital. He is pretty much the G word at the running back position. Generational is definitely well within his range of outcomes. He's phenomenal. I think he's pretty much the easy 101 in like 98% of league formats out there. Next pick, Caleb.
Now, the 102, there's some debate in the Dynasty streets, Addison, on what you should do at the 102. But at the 102, I will go with Omarion Hampton, running back out of North Carolina, lands with the Chargers in round 1. Beautiful landing spot with Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman. They got the offensive line. I understand they did sign Najee Harris in free agency, but Najee Harris, sure, we'll give him the first 4 or 5 games of the season, but then it's going to be Omarion Hampton from here on out. I have Omarion Hampton sliding in easily right now as at least a top 6 Dynasty running back entering into his rookie season. So absolutely love Omarion Hampton here at the 102.
I'm going to go at the 1.03 then with Cam Ward. I feel like a lot of people are kind of hesitant about taking Cam Ward because they don't really view him as kind of like an uberly great quarterback prospect, but I honestly think that he is. He's grading out super well in my marker system. He's one of just pretty much a handful of quarterbacks over the past decade that have hit at least 17 or more adjusted markers. 18 is honestly the max right now. It is a possible out of 20, but 18 is the max that we've seen over the past decade, or honestly of all time since like 2003, when my database goes back. Ward is at 17, which is right there with like Mahomes and Tua and, you know, all these other really, really, really good quarterbacks at the NFL level with multiple QB1 seasons. I trust the talent of Cam Ward. I trust the immediate opportunity. He's going to be the day one starter. I don't really want to overthink it here, especially in the Superflex League. If you're at the top, you need a quarterback, take Cam Ward.
At the 104, I go with Travis Hunter, wide receiver / cornerback, going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I'll be completely honest, Addison, we had a lot of people in the streets that immediately after they're like, oh, we like the landing spot. But then it wasn't until the press conference after where Liam Cohen said he assumed that Travis Hunter would play most of his snaps as a rookie at the wide receiver position that everybody in the Dynasty landscape started going crazy. I think there's a lot of talk that maybe even at the 102, when I took Hampton, you should have Travis Hunter in consideration there, especially if you need a wide receiver. Some people are worried about Brian Thomas Jr. We're not in that camp. We absolutely love BTJ, but I think taking Hunter here, I think the upside is still there for him to be a dominant wide receiver. He'll kind of slides in right now for me around wide receiver 11 in Dynasty rankings. I know you're about to pick at the 105, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on Travis Hunter at the 104.
Yeah, I do think that this is a great place to kind of slow down. We kind of sped right through those top 3 picks. They are pretty chalky and kind of have been the consensus top 3 for, you know, even for a couple months leading into the NFL draft. But Travis Hunter up here, you know, like you said, some people have been talking about him at the 1.02, at the 1.03, ahead of Hampton or Ward or both. And I honestly don't really disagree with that. Like, I loved hearing the fact that, you know, in the press conference, Liam Cohen was like, he is primarily going to be a wide receiver, and then he's going to get mixed in the defensive side and playing DB. I think his upside is absolutely tremendous. And I don't care about Brian Thomas Jr. I don't care about Travis Hunter for Brian Thomas Jr. if you're worried in the opposite direction either. I think that this is just going to be a rising tides raise all ships kind of thing. Travis Hunter is a phenomenal wide receiver prospect. I definitely think that he has like the ultra super ceiling of being a top 5 Dynasty wide receiver. I don't really know if there is another wide receiver in this class that really truly has that ceiling. I think Tet McMillan can get pretty close, but Hunter absolutely can get there, even as the more wide receiver 2 or really 1B with Brian Thomas Jr. There is plenty of vacated targets there from Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram last year. There could just be more volume just in general, just if the offense is better, if Liam Cohen increases the pace of play, more touchdown opportunity if the offense is better and Liam Cohen makes the system just all that more friendly for quarterbacks and wide receivers. And I think if you're swinging for upside, there isn't anybody else in this class that says upside more than Travis Hunter. But then at the 1.05, I will be taking Tet McMillan. I think this is pretty much the first or second real tier break in the first round of the Superflex rookie drafts. I think Ashton Jeanty is pretty much in a tier of his own, outside of maybe some weird like alt formats. If you have 14 or 16 team Superflex leagues, or maybe if you play in an IDP league, Travis Hunter might interest you a little bit more there. But I think these top 5 picks especially with these last 4 that we ran through with Hampton, Ward, Hunter, and McMillan, is a tier break. I love Tet McMillan at 8 to the Carolina Panthers. It just feels very similar to Drake London going to the Atlanta Falcons before they got Kirk Cousins and now before they got Michael Penix. The quarterback situation wasn't necessarily there, but he was able to succeed despite that. It feels very similar to Garrett Wilson going to the Jets, with Zach Wilson, and then has been dealing with the quarterback issues ever since. So if Bryce Young ends up being better than what we necessarily have seen, and he had a good leap in year 2, that could be good things for Tet McMillan. And maybe Tet McMillan is the reason why Bryce Young continues to take a step forward in a year 2 Dave Canales system. So I just love taking Tet McMillan. I don't know if he reaches top 5, like I said, Caleb. I don't know if maybe you feel differently about that in terms of top 5 dynasty wide receiver ceiling, but I think he can definitely get very close and could very easily be a top 12 dynasty wide receiver this time next year.
No, I'm 100% there. I think we're looking at Tet McMillan sliding right into that wide receiver 13 to wide receiver 15 range in the dynasty ranking. So 100%, if he comes out, has even just above average year, I do think Tet McMillan will definitely slide himself into the back end of wide receiver ones in the dynasty landscape. But at the 106, I will be taking TreVeyon Henderson, who lands in round 2 to the New England Patriots. And I think, honestly, Addison, round 2 started off with a bang with both Ohio State running backs coming off the board. But the reason that I'm still very excited for TreVeyon Henderson is because there is just so much receiving upside when it comes to him playing for the Patriots. Now, I understand you have Drake May. He's not 100% a Konami code quarterback where he's running all the time, but he does like to scramble. So a lot of people are already starting to say, hey, I'm a little bit worried that TreVeyon Henderson, who is a really good pass catching back, is not going to get that sort of upside. I don't believe that in a second. I believe TreVeyon Henderson has in his range of outcomes somewhere around 100 targets that could come his way in his rookie season, which is only going to propel him, especially if he gets somewhere around 70 to 75 receptions. We could be looking at TreVeyon Henderson being an absolutely elite RB1 for future seasons, but even just for this rookie season. So I do have TreVeyon Henderson sliding in as my RB8 in Dynasty, and will gladly take him here at the 106.
I do also have TreVeyon Henderson as my RB3 in this class, but very, closely after him is my RB4 in Quinshon Judkins, his former teammate who goes two spots ahead of TreVeyon in the actual NFL draft, lands with the Cleveland Browns. I just love that landing spot so much. Cleveland wasn't really a landing spot that I think a lot of people really honed in on as a good landing spot for running backs. We went to Vegas, we went to Denver and the Chargers and Dallas and maybe even Pittsburgh or Jacksonville. But I don't think Cleveland got enough talk about it because they really don't have anybody else on that team. Nick Chubb is still a free agent. Maybe he does re-sign, or maybe he signs somewhere else with another team that maybe needs some extra depth and didn't really get one of the top running backs in this class. But it's just Jerome Ford there at this moment. And now Quinshon Judkins can come in. He can essentially be their new Nick Chubb in this Kevin Stefanski offense. Like, he fits that role to a T. And yeah, he might not have like the PPR upside, but I think that he's going to have, tons of rushing upside. He'll have some touchdown upside there as well. We'll figure out what the quarterback situation is if they go with one of their now like 5 quarterbacks after taking Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel the past 2 days. But I really, really, really like the landing spot for Quinshon Judkins. I think it makes perfect sense. Love the draft capital. Easy RB4 here for me at the 107.
At the 108, I kind of went in a different direction. Someone that was not on my radar going into round 2, but seeing RJ Harvey land on the Denver Broncos with that round 2 draft capital, you have to take him here at the 108. I understand taking him right behind Judkins. He didn't necessarily have the same profile. We weren't talking about him. We were actually talking about Kaleb Johnson ahead of him in our pre-draft process. But when you look at him landing with the Broncos, it's a really juicy landing spot. I understand the downside. He's 24 years old. A lot of people, like we said, didn't like his profile coming out. But hey, we all have to kind of readjust our expectations, especially after we see that draft capital get put into play in a situation where the Denver Broncos defense is going to be really good this next season. They're going to have a lot of favorable game scripts. So I'm 100% taking RJ Harvey here, knowing that there's a lot of upside, and in a room where he's going to be kind of stepping in as the main man from the jump. Give me some RJ Harvey here at the 108.
RJ Harvey is an interesting name for me just in general because he's actually grading out in my marker system as the RB3 in the class. He is ahead of both Ohio State kids and obviously ahead of Kaleb Johnson, who goes, technically a round later than RJ Harvey in the 3rd round, even though it was not even that many picks after numerically. I'm having a tough time with RJ Harvey just in terms of the massive value rise that he is having now, just because he landed with the Denver Broncos. And yes, like I'm also trying to, reconcile the fact that he was a second round pick, but he wasn't predicted to be a second round pick. Some people thought maybe he could sneak into day 2 and then get a good landing spot, or maybe he's one of those guys that's, a very early day 3 pick. Like we have a couple of names here coming up soon, but I it's hard for me to reconcile that the NFL valued him so much more than it seemed like consensus did in the media. And then also we're now value rising him so much from where we as a dynasty community had him. A lot of people had him like outside their top, 8 to 10 running backs in this class is just like a fun name that we could see what happens with him. And now you're taking him here at the RB, 5 spot at the 108. And I understand all of it. Denver's phenomenal. The draft capital's phenomenal. He himself is a very, very good prospect. He was uber productive at UCF, has a lot of the fantastic PFF metrics that we're looking for, and missed tackles and breakaway runs and all that kind of stuff. It's just hard for me to reconcile how much his value has risen in literally less than 24 hours to now that we're talking about him this high. It feels like we're taking away the ceiling of his career, especially when he is 24 years old. And, that might be fine from a dynasty perspective if you play in a 2 to 3 year window, but it is, I think, just a little bit, it's just hard for me to reconcile how quickly he's risen just because of that landing spot, really. But at the 1.09, just to move away from this little running back run that we've been going through, I will be taking Emeka Egbuka, as apparently I just really love Ohio State players now, which definitely hurts as a Penn Stater myself. But I just trust a lot of the talent and the future situation that Egbuka could find himself in. I know people might be a little bit disappointed in the landing spot, especially for initial production, but Mike Evans is 32 years old this year, missed 3 games last year with some injuries. He's going to be a 33-year-old free agent next year, and that's not even to say that maybe he retires. He just hangs his hat up after breaking Jerry Rice's 1,000-yard record with another 1,000-yard year this year. He's got a Super Bowl ring. Like, he could just retire next year and be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Godwin himself coming off of an injury. And he's also 29 years old. So, this could be insurance for in case Chris Godwin, needs to recover a little bit longer this year. So they have another capable guy this year, but then also more of long-term insurance for post Mike Evans. And I trusted Egbuka's talent so much. I trust in Baker Mayfield in this offense now that, I think I've been calling him this year's version of Rome Odunze. You're going to have to wait. But I think that there's so much insulated value in Egbuka right now that he's going to be valued, at least the same, if not even more, heading into next year, especially if circumstances, fall in his favor heading into 2026.
I totally agree with you, Addison. I love me some Emeka Egbuka coming into Ohio State. Same exact pedigree as a guy like a JSN, like any of the Ohio State wide receivers coming in. And I think having the expectation that, yes, it might be a little bit of a down year one comparatively to if he landed on maybe a team like the Houston Texans per se. But I still am really excited for Emeka Egbuka. I think getting that top 20 draft capital means a lot. And like you kind of hit on, like Chris Godwin potentially is going to be dust here over the next few seasons. Mike Evans might retire. We could be looking at a completely different Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver room than what we're accustomed to. So I do like this pick for you here with Emeka Egbuka. At the 110, I am taking Jaxson Dart, quarterback for the Giants. And yes, this is 100%. I feel like a reach, but you have to do it in Superflex, because when we start to talk about quarterbacks that kind of get this back end 20 type draft capital, yes, of course, they're the hits of people that we know of, like a Lamar Jackson or even potentially like a Jordan Love from a few years ago. But there's a lot more misses than there are hits when we talk about, like, even looking at guys like a Paxton Lynch from 2016 or EJ Manuel from 2013. Like, the list goes on and on of some of these back end quarterbacks in the first round. And so I'm not trying to say that I'm already saying Jaxson Dart's a bust, but I'm not super confident, Addison, in this pick. But you have to do it because this is Superflex. We do understand the positional advantage that if you do have a quarterback, and if Jaxson Dart were to hit with Malik Neighbors, especially playing for the Giants, we would be talking about him probably in that like QB 14 to QB 17 range. And so I'll take a shot here at the back end of the first round. I know I just essentially said why I probably wouldn't do it, but I think we kind of get to this part and we're starting to get into a next tier And I would just rather take the shot on a Jaxson Dart, especially if I am a QB needing team, if I need a QB3, and then kind of address some other positions later.
I actually love this pick of Jaxson Dart. I seem to have been higher than on Jaxson Dart pre-draft, and now I seem to find myself still higher on him post-draft. I understand, the some of the issues and the pitfalls that come with being a more later first round pick. You hit on a lot of perfect examples, and even maybe as recently as like Mac Jones was like the 15th overall pick, flamed out even after a couple like okay years for the New England Patriots, but still flamed out, not worth the pick if you take him in the first round of rookie drafts. But I just believe that Jaxson Dart is just a good quarterback, and I think that the Giants also believe that he's a good quarterback. I've seen a lot of people saying that he's going to redshirt this year. I personally believe that he's going to get thrown in there by, if not by the end of September, by at least October. I think Russell Wilson is going to maybe be the starter for a couple of weeks. I think Jameis Winston is, I wouldn't be shocked if Jameis Winston didn't even make the team. His contract situation is very minimal for them to just let him go. If they do believe in Jaxson Dart and the development that he has very quickly in their training camp and offseason programs, that I just think that Jaxson Dart plays 10, 12, maybe even more games this year as a rookie, and then just carries that forward into 2026. And like you said, he's throwing in Malik Neighbors. Maybe they add some more weapons for him, either in free agency next year or in the draft next year, that, they just continue to build around Jaxson Dart. And I just believe that he's a good quarterback. He might be this year's version of Bo Nix. That might be setting the ceiling a little bit too high, but I just believe that he's a good quarterback, and he's thrown in Malik Neighbors with, and there could be a lot less or a lot worse situations for a rookie quarterback to come into and throwing to than Malik Neighbors. But then with the 111, I will take a guy that I have in the same tier as RJ Harvey, and now the new addition to my Pittsburgh Steelers in Kaleb Johnson. I love this pick so much because they were able to get him in the third round. And I wanted them to take Jaxson Dart in the first round. And I was betting on the fact that they were going to take a running back on day 2, but since they didn't have a second round pick, I wasn't sure of the quality of running back that they were going to get in round 3. But they end up getting Kaleb Johnson, a guy that I had ranked ahead of Quinshon Judkins pre-draft, and I think that he just fits this Steelers offense so perfectly, dude. Like, he is their new Najee Harris. He might even be better than Najee Harris. And also just the fact that it's, his wardrobe doesn't change at all. He's going from the black and gold in Iowa to the black and gold in Pittsburgh. I love it so much that I think taking him at the 111 here is kind of a value and a little bit of a steal. Not necessarily the second round draft capital that we want, but still solid day 3 or day 2 draft capital. And I don't even think Pittsburgh necessarily cares about that all too much, especially if he is, a annual 1,000 yard rusher, which he could very well be as early as 2025.
He's 100% a juiced up Najee Harris. And I think that's what makes me super excited for Kaleb Johnson and of course your Steelers being able to land him, because I was surprised that he made it all the way to the Steelers in round 3. I thought for sure that some team was going to snatch him up in the second round. And so I definitely like that landing spot for you a ton. But landing here at the 112, I will be taking Tyler Warren because this is tight end premium. I'll be honest, Addison, I wasn't a huge fan of both landing spots for both Loveland and Warren, but I do think Warren, I had him as my tight end 1 coming into the draft. And as much as I don't love both landing spots, I'll still take a shot on Tyler Warren here. Really, for me, he was still the consensus top tight end position. Really, I understand he's from your Penn State, so there's a lot of rumors, and maybe not rumors, that's the wrong word to say, but there's a lot of opinions out there that he was used more of a gadget player, that he actually can't get open, yada, 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 yada. I don't believe any of that. He's taken in the top 15 for a reason. You also have the fact that he lands with a Colts team where both quarterbacks in Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson can't hit the broadside of a barn. So I am a little bit worried about the overall quarterback play when you're also looking at weapons like Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, A.D. Mitchell that he's going to have to compete with. So I think that kind of gives him a boost down, but getting a talent like Tyler Warren at the 112 in your rookie draft is absolutely electric. You're
definitely trusting the talent of Tyler Warren. And I think you're also kind of doing the same thing with Colston Loveland, who we'll get to in just a minute here. Even though Loveland's situation got way messier after round 1. But Tyler Warren, I think, like you said, like the draft capital is there. The situation, at least in terms of other pass catchers that he's going to have to compete with, seems to be fairly wide open, especially if Tyler Warren is as good as advertised. They do need to figure out the quarterback situation with Richardson and Daniel Jones, but maybe, both of those guys just kind of needed a more friendlier target that Richardson doesn't have to throw it, 60 yards downfield to Alec Pierce every other play, or, Michael Pittman maybe isn't as reliable. Like, if he might just needed Tyler Warren to, have a bit of a friendlier guy right in front of him rather than chucking it downfield. Same with Daniel Jones for most of his career in New York. So you definitely are trusting the talent of Tyler Warren. The immediate production may not be there, but this could be more of a slow burn like we generally see with rookie tight ends. And, it's hard to remember what it used to be like with tight ends, even just a few years ago, before Brock Bowers, before Sam Laporta. But, this is generally how these tight ends kind of just coming in the NFL. It takes a little bit longer of a time. We're talking about year 3, year 4, year 5. And that might not be, what you want at the 112 with Tyler Warren, but I think that he is as good as bet as any tight end prospect with the draft capital in the situation that he's in, and well worth, I think, a top 12 pick in most leagues, especially in this 1.5 tight end premium that we're mocking in. But now as we get into round 2, I'm up at the 2.01, and I'm going to turn to Jayden Higgins, actually. I loved the landing spot of the Houston Texans. Very obviously that they needed another wide receiver, and I love that it's another outside wide receiver across from Nico Collins. He's never going to get an opposing defense's top cornerback across from him because they're going to go to Nico. CJ Stroud is a really, really good quarterback, so I love the quarterback pairing that we have with Jayden Higgins. Love the draft capital that he got. I think he was the first skill player taken on in round 2 at like 34th overall. So the investment into him was almost nearly a first round pick. You get the situation, you get the immediate opportunity for production, and I really like Jayden Higgins a lot pre-draft too. So it's not to say that I'm just rising so much on him just because of landing spot and draft capital. I kind of had him in this range anyway, and the NFL just kind of confirmed what I thought about him. So 2.01, I love it here with Jayden Higgins.
No, I love that pick for you, Addison, because then at the 202, you kind of forced my hand here. I was forced to take Matthew Golden, first round drafted wide receiver to the Green Bay Packers. And Addison, I know you and Justin and myself, none of us are really Matthew Golden fans. It's kind of been documented. We don't have to dive into the numbers, but since he is the first Packers wide receiver taken in the first round since 2002, a lot of people are hype about it. A lot of people are excited, especially on a Packers depth chart that has kind of just been wide receiver by committee over the last few seasons. I don't look at Matthew Golden as an alpha, but at the same time, you're getting a first round drafted wide receiver at the early part of your second round rookie draft, which in previous years wouldn't have happened. We could even look at first round drafted wide receivers, though I don't want to say that they always hit because we've had the Sky Moores, we've had the list goes on and on. Henry Ruggs. There's been so many busts, but then there's also been so many that have hit. I just don't like the profile of Matthew Golden being more of a speedster. We'll have to see how that plays into effect in this overall rotation. I'll take him here, though. Like I said, I do think the value is here that you got to take the shot. I have to take a shot on a Matthew Golden, the first round drafted wide receiver, over maybe some of the 3rd, 4th round drafted running backs. Yeah,
the draft capital is definitely where you start to lean into. I remember this kind of reminds me of Jahan Dotson in his rookie year and where we were taking him in drafts. A lot of people, like, he made it into the early second, and people were like, just take him because he's a first round pick. Now that, if you're a Matthew Golden fan, that might not be the best example for you in terms of why you should be drafting Matthew Golden as a first round pick in this early second, but you just got to lean into the draft capital because that is definitely the biggest, signal for success for all of these prospects across all the positions is just that draft capital. And that is why at the 2.03 here, I will also be taking Colston Loveland. And I know I don't love the situation anymore, especially after they took Luther Burden in the second round. I was already hesitant on it because I was like, he's going to be there with DJ Moore. He's going to be there with Rome Odunze. Loveland fits there. They still have Cole Kmet, but it's a Ben Johnson offense. I'm going to trust it. And then they took Luther Burden in the second round, and I'm like, boy, this thing gets really, really messy really quickly. But I'm going to lean into the draft capital. I'm going to lean into the possibility that, if Colston Loveland, all these guys aren't going to be 1,000-yard wide receivers every single year. But if Colston Loveland is one of the guys who's getting 800 yards and maybe a handful of touchdowns, like at the tight end position, that is a very good fantasy producer. And it's a lot easier for him to produce as a top guy at his position than it is for Burden or Rome Odunze to produce as top guys at their position. So I'm going to lean into the draft capital. It was Ben Johnson's first pick. He, if you listen to the phone call the Bears shared with him, seemed like he was very, very excited to get him. He plays maybe like the Sam Laporta role that he just had in Detroit. I'll trust into that. I'll trust into the town of Loveland, and I'll trust into Ben Johnson.
Moving on here to the 204. I will be taking Cam Skattebo, running back to the New York Giants, gets 4th round draft capital. And yes, I'm taking Cam over some wide receivers that got round 2 capital. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are like, hey, like what's happening with my Tyrone Tracy shares? Kind of where are we at? The reason I'm taking Cam is just because I know that if he were to come out and if he were to be the early dominant running back, get most of those touches, if we're talking week 4 on, you could 100% be looking at selling Cam Skattebo for a late 26 first and really profiting if something were to happen because of the dynasty love that is out there for Cam Skattebo, especially after that amazing playoff run that he did have in college. And so I'm taking the chance here on Cam Skattebo. Like I said, I think it's a good opportunity for him. I think there's definitely a path for him to become the dominant ball carrier for the New York Giants. But I would also understand if you would argue with me, Caleb, you should have taken the process play and taken a round 2 wide receiver.
I do think that is a little bit early just because he does get that day 3 draft capital, even if it was one of the first picks in the 4th round. But I do see the upside here. Like one of my buddies, he has Tyrone Tracy in a bunch of leagues, and he wasn't able to really sell him prior to the NFL draft. But then we were coming into Saturday, and he was like, hey, Tyrone Tracy actually ends up being kind of a winner, especially if he can, kind of navigate a couple more of these running backs that might get drafted early on day 3. Unfortunately, Cam Skattebo did go there. So he texted me and he was like, hey, what do you think about Skattebo there for my Tyrone Tracy shares? And I said that I think Skattebo plays a very good complementary role to Tyrone Tracy, but I would also be concerned that maybe Skattebo is a better receiver than Tyrone Tracy. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but Skattebo is definitely a way better pass catching back than I think a lot of people want to give him credit for. So if the Giants really just want a guy to go out there on all 3 downs, Skattebo is more than capable of doing that, a la, James Conner or something like that. Maybe it's a James Conner, and then you also have Chase Edmonds. Is kind of like, whenever Conner went over to the Cardinals very early on, just a few years ago, that could be kind of the situation that we see with Skattebo and Tyrone Tracy. So Tracy might still be involved, definitely is a good handcuff, but I think Skattebo, definitely he has a floor here, but there is also very much a argument for a ceiling play at the 2.04 here too. But at the 2.05, a guy that I would take over Cam Skattebo, another one of these 2nd round wide receivers that I love the landing spot for, is Tre Harris, landing as that more X wide receiver, the Quinton Johnston replacement with the LA Chargers, as the perfect wide receiver complement with Ladd McConkey paired with Justin Herbert. I love this landing spot so much, and I just love that the opportunity that Tre Harris has to be an immediate producer and to grow into an offense where he doesn't necessarily need to be their wide receiver 1 off the rip. Like Ladd McConkey can be their go-to guy. They're obviously going to be very run first with Omarion Hampton, with Najee Harris there as well in 2025. But if I'm trusting into the talent of Tre Harris, like what we saw at Ole Miss with Jaxson Dart, imagine what he could do especially if he gets closer to his ceiling at the NFL level with Justin Herbert. So I love taking him here in this kind of early to mid range of the 2nd round of rookie drafts. And he's easily right. I would take him over Cam Skattebo. I even debated him ahead of Colston Loveland as well. So that's how high I am on Tre Harris.
No, I have Tre Harris in the same tier. So I'm 100% with you. I love the landing spot, especially knowing the fact that he's going to slide into a wide receiver room that is pretty much ladder bust. And so I'm excited to see what Tre Harris can do. And I absolutely love that pick, Addison, at the 205. At the 206, I take your boy, Jack Bech. We are excited because Tom Brady looked at him and said, man, this is the new age Wes Walker. This is the new age Julian Edelman. And he said, I need him for the Raiders. And now, how is that going to play into effect with Chip Kelly's offense? I know I wasn't the biggest fan of his from at least a prospect profile perspective when you're looking at him I know he transferred over to TCU as a junior, but really it wasn't until this senior, his fourth season, that he really started to put up some serious production. But getting that round 2 capital, landing on a spot that he's instantly kind of sliding in as the wide receiver 2 on this offense makes me excited. Now, who's the quarterback? How is the quarterback going to look like with Geno Smith? We'll have to see. We've seen Geno Smith have really good production when it comes to being able to target JSN out of the slot. So looking at a guy like Jack, I think he's going to be all over, and I think getting him in the middle of the second round is probably appropriate value. And there's going to be people here in the comments that are going to say, Addison, Caleb, why are you taking Cam Skattebo over a guy like Jack? But I do think these 3 guys are kind of all in the tier for myself.
I don't necessarily disagree that Bech should be in this range, but I actually have him below the guy that I'm taking, the 2.07. I am all aboard the Kyle Williams train, man. I mean, he popped up in my marker system. I remember when I was running through, I was like, I'm adding all these guys from the combine, and then I'm looking at sorting it by who's at the top. And I see, Tet McMillan's up there. Travis Hunter could get there if he had tested. Luther Burden's up there. Who's this Kyle Williams dude? I've never heard of this Kyle Williams guy because I'm not really in tune with the college football-ness as much as everybody else, and he plays all the way across the other side of the country from where I live, so I never ever see him. But the more I got into Kyle Williams, the more I dug into his profile, the more I watched his film, I started to love this dude so much, and I thought that he was a sneaky bet to be, a solid round or day 2 pick, even if not even a round 2 pick. He did go very early in the 3rd round, but the landing spot to the New England Patriots, man, phenomenal. I have been comping him kind of to like a Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell kind of player. So he lands on a team that also invested into Stephon Diggs. But I think that he just has that immediate opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 for Drake May, the long-term opportunity and ceiling to be that wide receiver 1 for and constantly improving Drake May. I just, man, dude, I cannot be more on board with Kyle Williams. I would take him over Jack Bech. I would take him over Cam Skattebo. I would debate him over Tre Harris, over Colston Loveland. I would take him over Matthew Golden. That's how high I am on Kyle Williams, and I got him here at the 2.07. Love it.
I love your enthusiasm, and especially as a Drake May believer, a Drake May shareholder, we were positive to see Kyle Williams land there. But at the 208, I bit the bullet. I took Luther Burden, who lands in the most not ideal situation with the Chicago Bears, because you already had DJ Moore, you already had Rome Odunze, and then the day before, you see Colston Loveland get drafted there, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, Luther Burden's going to be the 4th receiving option here on the Bears. Now, the pro of this is he's entering into a Ben Johnson offense with a head coach that is a good play caller that can dial up this offense, makes you a little bit excited, really excited for Caleb Williams, more than just feeling good about Luther Burden. But if you remember, Addison, at this time last year when people were talking about the 2025 class, it was all about Luther Burden because Luther Burden was kind of projected to be that guy. He didn't turn into that guy as a prospect, had a really down year as a junior at Missouri, but I will bite the bullet. I'll take the talent and the potential that he's going to be able to work out, especially getting that round 2 draft capital. Give me Luther Burden here at the 208.
You have to take Luther Burden when you get down into this level, honestly, just because it is the talent. It is still the opportunity of this offense, with Ben Johnson, with Caleb Williams, and no, he's not going to be able to support everybody unless he turns into, Broncos Peyton Manning and throws for like 5,300 yards and 50 touchdowns every single year. But, there are maybe some avenues for Luther Burden. You're going to have to take a little bit of some liberties with some of these arguments, but maybe DJ Moore is gone in 2 years and then Luther Burden has that more like traditional year 3 wide receiver breakout. That could be something where he kind of follows like the Chris Godwin model, who came in and was behind Mike Evans, behind Deshaun Jackson, took a couple years, but then years 3 through 8 were really, really good for Chris Godwin because the situation opened up for him and he was still a really good wide receiver. Maybe he is better than Rome Odunze. That may or may not be a valid argument right now. But I mean, if you had been talking about Luther Burden in last year's class, I think a lot of people at that time would have probably thrown Burden ahead of Rome Odunze, or at least neck and neck. So maybe there's that argument there. Maybe, he is definitely better than Colston Loveland. Maybe that there is a lot of opportunity if they run a lot of 11 personnel. Caleb Williams really likes targeting him as a kind of slot Amon-Ra role in this Ben Johnson offense. Like, there are arguments to be made, and you're betting on the talent, you're betting on the offensive system and the scheme that, and the draft capital is there as well for Luther Burden, that you have to just see what happens, I think. And maybe it pans out, maybe it doesn't, but at the 2.08, I think you just have to make that bet. But now at the 2.09, I'm just going to round out this little wide receiver run that we've been on with Jaylen Noel, the other Iowa State wide receiver and the other Houston Texan wide receiver. So it's just there's very, very fun like narratives and stuff saying that he's going to be paired back with Jayden Higgins and everything like that. I do find it very interesting that the Texans prioritized Higgins so much more than Jaylen Noel. They're essentially like a whole round apart, but I still don't necessarily, want to say that necessarily means that Higgins is guaranteed to be better than Jaylen Noel. I know I've been on Team Higgins basically all offseason, but I know a lot of other, very well-respected analysts have it, the opposite way, that Jaylen Noel fits NFL offenses a lot more than Jayden Higgins kind of on the outside, especially if, he's not able to separate as well as Jaylen Noel. Maybe CJ Stroud likes Noel and the role that he's playing in that offense a lot more as kind of like that Diggs or Tank Dell role than somebody else on the outside. So I think taking a shot on both wide receivers, even if you take the shot on both guys in the same draft to both be on your team, I think one of them could potentially hit, maybe even both of them hit. I don't necessarily know, but I do think that at the 2.09, I'm very confident in Jaylen Noel's talent. The draft capital is still there. The situation's still pretty there with some of the unknowns. And I'll just draft Jaylen Noel at the late second.
At the 210, I bit the bullet. I went back to the running back well, and I take Bhayshul Tuten, who gets round 4 draft capital to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And yes, I know a lot of people are all of a sudden being like, oh man, it's a 3-man committee with Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne, and now Tuten. But I still believe that Tuten instantly slides in as the RB2. And who's not to say that something doesn't happen to Travis Etienne here over the next few weeks, potentially with a trade. But even if it doesn't happen, Tuten's instantly better than what we saw from Tank Bigsby over the last 2 seasons. Travis Etienne's entering into the last year of his contract. And so not to say that we can project that a round 4 running back is going to overtake and become the RB1 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but a guy that ran a 4.32 40-yard dash time, I want that all on my team, especially in the late second, taking those kind of dart throws, taking those shots. We saw what happened with a guy like a Devon Achane. I know Devon had a lot higher draft capital, a little bit better projection landing with the Miami Dolphins, but we're seeing Liam Cohen come in and just want to have speed, wanting to have playmakers all over the field. So I will take Tuten here in my back end of my second round, take that dart throw and kind of see where it goes.
It is fun to draft Bhayshul Tuten because of we just had the recent example of a 4th round running back supersede a veteran running back in a Liam Cohen offense last year. Now, Bucky Irving's like a top 7 or 8 dynasty running back. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Bhayshul Tuten, but it is just very fun just to have that, perfect example of a very similar situation last year. And I'm all aboard it. Like, I think this is the perfect range to take a shot on a guy like Bhayshul Tuten, who does seem like he could still be a handcuff. At the very worst, he seems like he might just be a handcuff to Travis Etienne if Etienne can return to form like what he was in 2022 and 2023. But, at the highest, it does seem like he has that opportunity to be even more than that, more than just the general handcuffs you're going to be drafting in the 3rd and 4th rounds that went on more later on day 3. So I love taking the shot on Bhayshul Tuten here at the 210. Then at the 211 here, I'm dipping back into draft capital a little bit, going back to the tight end position. I'm just going to draft Mason Taylor. I don't really have all that much to say about Mason Taylor. He's grading out well in my marker system, even though he doesn't necessarily have the uber production that Warren and Loveland and even maybe a guy like Harold Fannin or Aronde Gadsden necessarily did in college, but understandable. He played behind Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. for, basically his entire career. So I think that he has an immediate opportunity to be obviously the starting tight end for the New York Jets. He has the opportunity to be the number 2 target on that team behind Garrett Wilson. Don't necessarily love that he's going to be catching passes from Justin Fields off the rip, but if they figure out that quarterback situation with a friendlier pass catcher for receivers and tight ends for fantasy, then that could be a situation that he can just grow into. I'll take Mason Taylor here at the 211.
And then rounding out the second round at the 212, I did it. I took Dylan Sampson, who lands round 4 to the Cleveland Browns. You know, the Cleveland Browns, who would have thunked it? They took 2 running backs in the top 4 rounds, and then they ended up drafting 2 quarterbacks as well. I don't know who's running their operations. Andrew Berry, it's amazing that he still has a job. But kind of walking into Dylan Sampson, I saw someone on X say, hey, Browns, you're an idiot. You drafted the better running back in round 4 over your round 2 pick. So I'm not saying I still like Quinshon Judkins ahead, but hey, I'll take a shot on a guy like a Dylan Sampson who gets round 4 draft capital with the Cleveland Browns, who are clearly moving into a direction of trying to be more run heavy, especially replacing some of that Nick Chubb production with Quinshon Judkins, with Dylan Sampson. So I'll take a shot here at the end of round 2. Like I said, I think there's a lot of dart throws with some of these landing spots in round 4 and round 5 for some of these running backs that will kind of even show here in a bit. But Addison, what are your thoughts with kind of the Cleveland Browns draft? Because I know the people want your opinion on drafting 2 running backs and 2 quarterbacks in the same draft.
I will say that we did also mock out the third round of this mock draft, and we're not going to go through every pick by pick like we just did. I'll throw it up on the screen here. But I did draft Shedeur Sanders in this mock at the 3.05. I understand why people might be like, well, why would you take Shedeur? He has the 5th round draft capital or whatever. And he wasn't even the first quarterback that the Browns wanted. They took Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd. So I understand all that. But at the same time, like at this range, you're shooting for pure upside. If Shedeur Sanders is actually as good as a lot of people believe, especially Mel Kiper believes that he's as good as he is, then especially if he's coming in with a chip on his shoulder for falling that far, maybe he ends up being the Browns QB1. Maybe he ends up being kind of a redemption story. One of these Dak Prescott's, Russell Wilson's, these, day 3 picks that turn into being a starting quarterback. If you're looking for that kind of upside, you're not getting that with anybody else down in here in this range. I don't believe that Dylan Gabriel is capable of being a long-term starter in the NFL. I think Shedeur Sanders can be a long-term starter in the NFL. I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of him, but I still had him as my QB3 in this class. And I think that if you can get that at the 3.05, I think that is phenomenal. And I like the Dylan Sampson pick as well, just to kind of round out what the Browns are doing. We have Harold Fannin in here at the 3.04. So Cleveland took a lot of shots on offensive players. You may or may not like it, but there's a decent chance that you're going to be drafting a Brown at some point in your rookie drafts if you have a multitude of these picks.
The last and final question I have for you, Addison, before we wrap this up. If you had to put a bet on who the next Puka, who the Bucky Irving of round 3 would be, and I know that it's all independent of what happens in everyone's individual rookie drafts, but if you have a player kind of based on where we're seeing even just us kind of mocking this, who would you say?
That's a fantastic question. It's hard not to gravitate initially to Jaden Blue, who, was 5th round draft capital. You don't love to see that. But he goes to a wide open backfield in Dallas that he's just going to have to compete with Javonte Williams essentially. So, and he's got the speed. He's a hometown kid there. It's hard not to just gravitate right towards Jaden Blue for the immediate opportunity that we have him here in this kind of mid-3rd at the running back position. There's a lot of other running backs, and there's still, even some handcuffs that could have an opportunity, like Woody Marks, you took at the early 3rd. Maybe he's a guy that isn't necessarily like a Bucky Irving, like breakout rookie year, but he could be more of like a Jerome Ford kind of guy, or if Joe Mixon moves on in a year, Woody Marks could maybe get that role as a starter, like Chase Brown or something like that. In terms of like this year's Puka, it's hard to say that, I don't think anybody's going to be this year's Puka, but if you're looking for good late round bets, Alec Aomanor, I don't think is necessarily a bad bet in the 3rd. He wasn't even the first wide receiver that the Titans took in the draft, or even in that 4th round. They took Chimere DK at the early 4th, and then Aomanor in the late 4th. So that's kind of interesting, but I think Alec is better. So that's an interesting pick. Pat Bryant could be a guy that's very interesting. I will also shout out Torrey Horton to the Seattle Seahawks. Piques my interest tremendously, dude, as that they need speed. It's the Tyler Lockett replacement in that offense. And he was very productive in college. He's a guy that I have been trying to keep my eye on the entire draft, and he finally went in round 5. Love the Seattle Seahawks landing spot. If you're talking about a guy that could come out of, quote unquote, nowhere from day 3, I feel like there's decent odds that it might end up being Torrey Horton. So keep an eye on him in your 3rd or even the 4th rounds of rookie drafts, because not a lot of people might even know who he is.